Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Adrian here for digitaldojos.com, and today we're going to be talking about some iOS 9 battery saving tips. So nowadays, most modern iPhones, be it the 6 or 6S edition phones, have a pretty decent battery, enough to get us for the most part throughout the day, of course charging it at night or what have you. But there are still some things that we can do to, of course, save that extra bit of battery, or for you power users out there, for you people who are constantly on your phone, to really make the most out of your battery life. Now, let's start off with some of the basic ones, of course. Brightness, for example. By swiping up on Control Center, you can easily access your brightness setting, keeping in mind that, nowadays with the bigger phones like the 6S Plus, for example, you're pushing more pixels. The brighter the screen is, the more resources you're using. So finding that perfect level for you of what the screen brightness should be, and keeping that in mind, like by lowering it, you are saving some extra battery life. By going into your settings, of course, you can actually adjust this right here. And by turning off features like auto brightness, it's one sensor less that's on. So auto brightness by default will be aware of like your environment. So if you're in the sun, direct sunlight, if you're in a lower lit area, it'll try to adjust the brightness as such. But I like to turn that off and just leave it at wherever I set it at last and adjust it as needed. Again, that's all down to personal preference. Another thing that deals with personal preference is that of animations. Animations, while are cool and they add to the personalization of iOS, can eat up a little bit of your battery life. So for example, if you're using things like those dynamic wallpapers, that's something that can take up a bit of battery life. So, of course, I'm not saying you have to disable that, but just be aware of that. Other features that you can do or other tweaks that you can do, if you go into your general settings and then click on accessibility and then go down to reduce motion, you can actually turn this on to reduce certain motions and animations, such as the parallax effect of the icons. That's that effect when you're looking at your icons and moving your phone left to right. It kind of looks like they're following you. So you can turn those off or reduce those a degree, which also saves a bit of battery life. Now with iOS 9, one of the biggest updates and features is that of the low battery mode, which is actually super, super useful. So you have this battery tab here in your settings, and you click on that, you'll see a low power mode option. So low power mode allows you to essentially turn off a lot of these things that we talked about by default. So it'll just, or not default, but by flipping the switch. If you turn it on here, your battery will return to this little yellow icon, and essentially it will disable things like Hey Siri, which we'll talk about in a second, background app refresh, automatic downloads, and more. Now, very, very useful, and your iOS 9 will now automatically prompt you to enable this mode if you want at 20% and 10%, but some people just like to leave it running in general. If you don't really worry about these things that it disables, then it may be worth just leaving it on overall to save that extra battery life. Within the same menu, it's also important to look at the context of what is eating up your battery. So for example, recently Facebook pushed out an update that fixed a leak in their battery in their app because it was draining a lot of battery. So looking at your battery usage now and again to see what is eating up your battery may be worth noting, because sometimes apps may have issues where they're eating up a lot of battery. And again, that's worth noting. That way you can either uninstall that app or look for an update. All right, next up, let's talk about radios. Another basic thing here, but if you swipe up in your control center, you have the ability to disable things like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and even enable airplane mode very easily. Keeping in mind, if you're not using these things, like you're out and about and you're using cellular, easily disabling Wi-Fi does save you a bit of battery. Ultimately, if you really want to save battery, you can disable the 3G or 4G radios overall, keeping in mind that you won't be able to receive cell service. But that does save you a lot of battery. Things like when you're traveling, for example, it's worth turning on, because again, it just saves you a lot of battery life. Hey Siri. Hey Siri is something that you may not even have enabled by default, but if you do, if you go into your general settings in Siri, allow Hey Siri. Essentially, this allows it so that you can audibly trigger Siri just by saying that phrase. And that means it's constantly listening for those words. So if you have that on, turning that off now and again, if you're not using that feature, is very, very useful, because you don't have that one thing on constantly listening. And that way, again, in turn, save battery life. Last but not least is location services. Now, if you go into your privacy settings or your privacy tab under settings and click on location services, you can turn it off altogether. This uses things like GPS, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi to get a precise location for you. Now, this is useful for things within iOS, but also a lot of third-party apps will actually use your location in certain cases. So depending on the type of user you are, if you're somebody who uses location-based services all the time, maybe you're using like Foursquare, maybe you're tagging photos in Instagram. But if not, this is worth disabling, because this saves a ton of battery life, because it's not constantly checking, or apps that you may open up and unknowingly know that they're using your GPS data So you can also go into system services here to disable certain things that the OS uses your location services for. Again, saving you a lot of battery life in turn when you disable some of those, because it's not constantly checking to find out where you are. Again, that's all personal preference, and depending on the apps you use, you may want that on or off, or selectively off for some applications. All right, overall, nowadays, again, like I said, we are using our phones more and more to do a lot of different things, whether it's streaming music, playing games, looking at photos, what have you. So, with the great battery, there are still times where we're going to really drain it throughout the day. You can look at battery packs, you can look at accessories, you can, carry a charger in the car or what have you. But these are just some free tips that you can do by default on the operating system that you already have on your phone to help you save that much extra battery life. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, share it out with your friends. That can be useful to them as well. And if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all in the next video.